Hey there. Welcome to Storytime with Dr. Bird. I'm Dr. Bird. I'm a biblical scholar and I engage biblical texts looking for lots of things. But in this particular series, I'm looking for passages that have to do with sex, the relationship we call marriage. So I talk about it this way because marriage in the Bible is different than marriage today, and interactions that have to do with harm and intimate body parts. So there's a story in First Samuel that I overlooked that becomes relevant for the story I just got to in Second Samuel. So we're going to read both. First Samuel 18 and David's acquiring a whole bunch of Philistine foreskins, and then David and his 6 women and all the men, all the sons they bore him, and whatever conversation and laughter we get up to in between. So hang in there. We'll get started here in just a second. Hi. So I have to say, I hope I'm not going to embarrass anyone here, but as we went into the 32nd, I I just think it's interesting. I can't say that I disagree. It's about property and taking women's bodies and making sure they're procreating for the men, right? It's not at all like what people think of marriage as being today. At least most people that I know of. Anyway, yeah. So dealing with a head cold today. So I might have to, mute so I can blow my nose or whatever. Just keeping it real. I'm just here to keep it real. Okay. So yes, I was reading for today and I thought, oh my goodness, how did I overlook this particular story about David and the 100 foreskins? And actually, it might be 200, not just 100. So we're going to go back and read chapter 18 of 1 Samuel and then also read chapter 3 of 2 Samuel, which is kind of picking up a little bit of that story. But we're also getting to revisit David and Jonathan just briefly, which reminds me, by the way, I have linked in the notes for previous live sessions, live streams, the website. If I mention during a live stream a particular article, then I have tried, and I have been fairly consistent with this, to go and share that article. But the best way for me to do that is on my website. So, for instance, last Thursday, when we were talking about David and Jonathan and that passage in 2 Samuel 1, where it talks about David is mourning Jonathan. Jonathan lies slain upon your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother, Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. And there's so much to say about that. And there's also, it's important to not read too much through our own lenses, if we can, right, in trying to understand that. And so that is why I shared on my website. I'm going to share my screen real quickly. So I put a link in the live stream notes, right, to this page. So my website, jennifergracebird.com, and then you can see there are a whole bunch of things. Some is just in the past, some of my favorite interviews. I've written a handful of editorials, especially in the 20 teens. But I have a podcast called Wild Olive, Game-Changing Conversation about Literature, Culture, and the Bible. And then if you scroll on down, you'll see that this is where I share a link to documents that might be of interest. So the 2 most interesting ones recently are these 2 recent ones, Surpassing the Love of Women, and that'll take you to an article by Saul Olyan. And then what I talked about every chance I get, um, is what I learned about eunuchs in this article. And I can't remember when it came up. It may have been just a clip or short that someone was responding in. But this particular article, Eunuchs in the Post-Gender Jesus, I cannot overemphasize how much really interesting content there was in here. There's also a reference to the Gali, Galli, the the eunuchs who were priests, priestesses for other gods and goddesses. And I am drawing a blank on the specific connection right now, but it's in there. And I know that some of you already know all this stuff because someone commented on it. And I was like, yes. And here's one resource. There are other ways to get to this information, but there's a lot of really interesting content in terms of first century perspectives on eunuchs and why when there are some words put into Jesus' mouth, whether or not he actually said it, I don't care. He's depicted saying it, right? Essentially throwing the gauntlet that all men who can handle it should castrate themselves. And what does that mean in the first century context? And so many people in the church tradition have been taught that that is a reference to celibacy, and it is not. It just is not. That was an intentional choice that a bunch of men in the 4th century made to lay upon the story of eunuchs the idea that they were celibate. And it's kind of just the opposite. So it's really kind of an interesting thing for Jesus to be in the midst of a conversation about for which reasons are people allowed to divorce. Jesus ends up throwing this gauntlet about anyone who could handle it should castrate themselves for the kingdom. I mean, that's just a really interesting context, first of all, right, in which to throw that particular gauntlet. And then to see, there's a non-binary element to this that's very well known and understood in the first century that he's embracing, right? Or this kind of middle ground, both and, as well as eunuchs were anything but celibate. At least their reputation was that they were quite sexually active with both men and women. So this is where you can find, it's in the podcast tab on my website. So that's that. Okay. Was Jesus eunuch? Oh goodness, that's a fun question to come back to. I don't have any reason to think that. Yeah, and what I'm looking at the comments, by the way. So someone says, are we talking about David and Jonathan as an ancient bromance, or did you mean, yeah, given the time that you would have said that? Yeah, probably David and Jonathan, ancient bromance. I don't know, actually, when people use a reference to bromance, if they're actually being sarcastically or if they mean it seriously. So I hear it through the lens of evangelicals trying to deny any sort of sexual intimacy between two men, in this case, and saying they're just good friends. And I remember thinking that way. So I try not to use the word bromance because I only hear it being used in a trying to escape reality. Or I hear it being used sarcastically, and I don't really know how, I'm just trying to be clear about some things. So I'm not trying to say you shouldn't have made that comment, or I don't like you. I like that you made the comment. I don't know what to do with that though, right? And so what I do think is helpful to say is that there's every reason, historically speaking, contextually speaking, for us to assume that they had physical intimacy. That, regardless of any sort of historical accuracy and blah, 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 we have every reason to be able to say that's a thing that happened. And sometimes physical intimacy was a part of friendships. And whether male or female, and most friendships in the ancient world were between people of the same sex. And also, most of the things that people think of getting out of a marriage today were things that people got out of friendships in the ancient world. And in the ancient world, friendships were defined as being between two people of the same sex or gender, whichever way you want to talk about that. So to me, it's a fascinating reality of historical, human relationships, and the article that I linked, "Surpassing the Love of Women" by Saul Oleon, is oh, did I? Hang on, let's see, where did I yeah, there's the link to that specific page. Um, he's not trying to justify anything. He's trying to understand in context, and there are scholars who want to make scripture say what they want it to say, and 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 you can tell when you're reading if that's what's going on. At least I think you can. And I'm at a place where I do not need scripture to back up any particular stance or idea. I'm really interested in digging into what it is saying so that we can talk about it. Better understand the original context, that which we can get to. Understand it on its own terms before you do any kind of applying the ideas to today. And I know that some people watching this really don't care about applying the Bible to today. Some people watching this watch because it's helpful for them to have people call some of this stuff out. Some people come because they like these conversations. People are here for all kinds of reasons, so I don't want to assume any one particular perspective in terms of who's here now and or might be watching it later. So I share Professor Oleon's work because I respect it, and it was helpful for me in understanding a reference to the use of the word love, which is what we have there in that comment about Jonathan's love for David surpassed that of women. This is honestly unbelievably intense and significant to say that a man's love for his friends surpassed that of women. I mean, obviously, we could talk about how marriages as they look like then we're not about two equals who were doing this, because they love each other. It was just, pragmatic. And at the same time, because that's what they were, to talk about a love that he did have for someone that surpasses any of that, I think I just think it's staring us in the face, the depth and the importance of that relationship, right? Whatever you do with it beyond that, yeah. I understand, I'm interested in addressing these things and talking about them openly. So that's what I'm trying to do here. All right. So now to the storytime part. Okay. So I did briefly touch on this before, and so we're going to read through just to get the whole chapter. I think it's helpful. Plus, it makes it a little bit more like story time when I'm reading a big chunk like that. So chapter 18 of 1 Samuel. When David had finished speaking to Saul, this is right after he's been kind of taken under Saul's wing as someone to be in his court or something, right? When David had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And this is a passage we have discussed before. It is the only time in the entire Bible, Christian Bible, either testament, where people are talked about being bound to each other's souls. Just let that be what it is, right? Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. All kinds of reasons for that, potentially, right? Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that he was wearing and gave it to David. And we've talked about this, and I remember some really fun comments in the chat box over here. Took off the robe that he was wearing, and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. I remember saying, so what's going on? He's just down to his skivvies, right? And someone commented about seeing the nakedness of someone, right? Literally, they're seeing the nakedness. He's seeing the nakedness of Jonathan. It's a very vulnerable moment. David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. As a result, Saul set him over the army. And all the people, even the servants of Saul, approved. So there's a handing over of power that happens here when Jonathan does this, strips in front of David. Incredible vulnerability, but also, but definitely about power, right? As they were coming home, when David returned from killing the Philistine, the women came out of all the towns of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they made merry. Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s, whatever tune you want to put that to. Saul was very angry. Go figure, huh? For this saying displeased him. Yeah. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they've ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? He's taken my son. He's taken my son's power. Saul's definitely a paranoid kind of guy, huh? So Saul eyed David from that day on. The next day, an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul threw the spear for the thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. Can you imagine? I mean, I've been doing all this work around trauma-informed pedagogy and trying to be very sensitive to the ways that my own trauma is affecting the way I behave, and thinking about that when it comes to students and blah, blah, blah. And all I can, I read a passage like this and I'm like, what kind of terrifying trauma is that? And he continues to work for Saul. Saul's literally tried to kill him twice, and he's got to keep hanging around him. What is this? And no wonder the dude's got issues, right? I mean, I'm just saying, it's helpful to empathize with what people are dealing with. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, back to the text. Saul was afraid of David. What is that? Why? Because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Did you notice that it was an evil spirit from God that rushed upon Saul, just like we saw with Samson? It's an evil spirit. It's a spirit of the Lord that rushed upon Samson every time he did some sort of terrifying act of, bipolar aggression, for which I think he needed help, not to judge him for it. Okay. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. And David marched out and came in, leading the army. David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. When Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for it was he who marched out and came in, leading them. Then Saul said to David, here is my elder daughter Merab. I will give her to you as a woman, my English says wife. Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, I will not raise a hand against him. Let the Philistines deal with him. David said to Saul, who am I and who are my kinsfolk, my father's family in Israel, that I should be the son-in-law to the king? But at the time when Saul's daughter Merab should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel, the Meholathite, as a woman, my English says wife. Now, Saul's daughter Michal loved David. Again, I didn't look up the Hebrew there. It probably is Ahav. She loved him, but we don't have any sense of reciprocation here. I just want to point that out. She was told, and the thing pleased him. Saul was told, and the thing pleased him. Saul thought, let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Yeah, Saul is a serious piece of work, huh? Therefore, Saul said to David a second time, you shall now be my son-in-law. And I would love to know what the Hebrew actually is there, because That's not what it says. But anyway, Saul commanded his servants, "Speak to David in private and say, 'See, the king is delighted with you, and all his servants love you. Now then, become the king's son-in-law.'" So Saul's servants reported these words to David in private, and David said, "Does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, seeing that I am a poor man and of no repute?" Which is debatable, right? We do have the story being told about him killing Goliath. But anyway, the servants of Saul told him, "This is what David said." Then Saul said, "Thus shall you say to David, 'The king desires no marriage present except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged on the king's enemies.'" Now, I think people probably giggle or laugh at this if they read it today, but like, have you ever stopped to think about what this is actually about? um, I'm sorry, I'm reading back on some of the comments. Yeah. What is it about when you're telling a man to go essentially kill 100 of your enemies, and the way that you're proving that you've killed them is you're cutting off the tip of their penises. The end of the foreskin. I don't mean the tip of it, but the foreskin. The tip of the, and bring those back to me. Like, there's so many things about this scene that are concerning to me. Have you ever considered like what that bag looked like, to open it up and look in there? Also, just what they're doing. As I've said before, right? We have rock carvings of victory scenes of battles, and part of what you will see displayed in something like that, which takes some time to create, is the men who are winners are raping the men they've just beat as a final nail in the coffin kind of a thing. I'm not suggesting anything actually sexual is taking place here. I'm trying to get you to think about it all differently if you grew up hearing these stories and thinking about these things, because I have people asking me about circumcision today, right? Whether or not you should maintain, whether or not as a Christian you should be circumcised, or circumcising your male children or children born with penises. And of course, it's all about the covenant, but it isn't really just that, is it? I mean, this is one way you can prove it's a Philistine. He still had that foreskin available to be cut, so that verifies it's Philistines. Okay, sure. Why is everything about all these religious traditions focused around the phallus? That's the thing for me. That's the thing, right? Okay. So, the king desires no marriage present except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged on the king's enemies. I mean, how many foreskins are you worth? That's, like, what would be your price? Now, Saul planned to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines, right? Obviously. When his servants told David these words, David was well pleased to be the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David rose and went, along with his men, and killed 100. There's a version that says 200 Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number to the king, laying them out. 10 rows of 10. Okay. Which were given in full number to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. Saul gave him his daughter Michal as a woman. My English says wife. Gave him, right? He just purchased her for 100 foreskins. But when Saul realized that the Lord was with David, which this narrative has been saying over and over and over again, which is so funny. Okay. And that Saul's daughter Michal loved him. Saul was still more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy from that time forward. And we've actually seen that said a couple times already, right? And so we have, then the commanders of the Philistines came out to battle. As often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his fame became very great. And then in chapter 25, Saul actually gives Michal to someone else. Okay. And that's important because of what we're going to read right now. The Lego Bible is hilarious. Can you see that in the background? Is that why you made that comment? No. I do have a copy of one of the Lego Bibles. Oh, on this particular scene. Gotcha. I had a copy of one of the Lego Bibles on my bookshelf when I was sharing, when I had a couple housemates, and one read it to his 6-year-old daughter. That was very awkward because, he didn't realize it wasn't for children. That was awkward. Yeah. I didn't remember that it depicts that scene. Okay. Good stuff. I have to go look it up. I thought I had it on the edge of one of my bookshelves. Shouldn't waste time here looking for it, though. Hang on a second. Oh. Nope. No, I was thinking of the Brick Testament, and it's just this stories from the book of Genesis. So it's not going to have the David with 100 foreskins, but it might have the circumcision. There's a lot of pages given to Genesis 3, by the way. Oh goodness, there's a lot. It's just terrifying, really. Cain and Abel, and then Genesis 6, 8, 19. Let's see. God tests Abraham. Oh, they have the story of Genesis 19, Sodom and Gomorrah. That's really fun. Nope. 19. Okay. Babel. Okay. Well, okay. Jacob and his cousins. Okay. No. It is funny when they depict people, dying in the blood. Wrestles with God. No. Laban. My time is fulfilled. Now give me my woman so that I may lie with her. Let's actually go into her, not lie with her. Held a wedding feast. Behold, it was Leah. Okay. No, I should probably get that one though, because that's now I really want to see that. Okay. Yes, it is a form of humiliation, even if it's not any form of rape being implied, because he's just cutting off skin. That's not actually engaging. I do think it's a form of humiliation. Yes, it's you guys and your issues with your penises just crack me up. Okay, we're back. We're into 2 Samuel 3. I'm wondering what new perspective on David I have given you, Joe Smith. I'm glad for that. I think that's helpful. I think it's helpful to see people a little bit more complexly than we do. I'm going to go on over to 2 Samuel 3 now, and there's a reference in here. I'm going to go ahead and share it with you right now. There's a reference to Rizpah in this part of the story, or maybe it's right in the chapter before. I'm going to share again. Yeah, the long weeping. I have a friend who is Jessie Van Eerden, who is she has a novel, Call It Horses. It's a very interesting depiction of characters and life struggles, really. I think it's very interesting. But she enjoys essays, and I think that is where her strength is. And I have a copy. I couldn't put my hand on this copy. I think someone borrowed it. But The Long Weeping, there isn't a table of contents here. One of the stories in this collection is about a rereading of Rizpah, who is, I'm going to sneeze, one of David's, is she one of David's women? Huh. Okay. Oh, Rizpah, sorry, was one of Saul's concubines. And there's a reference to her in this chapter, and then I think there's an event later on that's really important that I haven't reread yet. Anyway, so I just thought I'd share it there. Van Eerden, and lots of people like to do this, where they reread or take a story from a biblical context and bring it into modern day realities, reread it through a modern lens. Like, what would that actually look like? How might that play out? And it's just terribly moving and profoundly insightful. So I just thought I'd share that with you, for those of you who are into that kind of thing. And excuse me just a moment. Okay. Yeah. What do you all do for head colds? I'm just curious. Are you a cold ease kind of person? Are you a just let your body deal with it all? Are you I take a bazillion milligrams of vitamin C? I'm just curious, just curious. Okay. So, gives me something random to ask you all about and ask for some feedback. It's kind of fun. Okay. So we are skipping over to 2 Samuel 3. We read about David, and I reread it briefly here at the beginning, mourning Jonathan's death and that whole thing about your love surpassing women. And then again, for those of you who are just joining us, when I reference an article, a scholarly article in one of my live sessions, I really do try to go link it on my website and then share that link in the comments or in the description for the live session. It's a lot to follow back on if you're just kind of hanging out and not really, super into it. But the website itself has several scholarly articles related to these topics already, which might be of interest to some of you. So chapter 3 of 2 Samuel. There was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. So this is after Saul has died, and there's a struggle for power. Go figure. And technically David is supposed to be king next, but it's not happening yet. So David grew stronger and stronger while the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. Sons were born to David at Hebron. I love this line. Sons were born to David, right? Just magically. They just appeared. Boom. Right? His firstborn was Amnon of Ahinoam of Jezreel. So this is a political alliance taking place here, right? Jezreel sends one of their probably more beautiful women in their cultural context to David. And so they have a pact through this woman's body. Happens a lot over history, right? It's not the first time in history, certainly not the last. Okay. So Ahinoam gives birth to Amnon, but the story doesn't even say it that directly. His second, Chileab of Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. I do think that's funny that she continues to be called the widow of Nabal, but that's where she came into the picture, right? So she gave birth to Chileab, or Chileab. The third, Absalom, son of Maacah, daughter of King Talmai of Geshur. So again, Geshur alliance with David through his daughter Maacah, who gave birth to Absalom. The fourth, Adonijah, son of Haggith. The fifth, Shephatiah, son of Abital. and the sixth, Ithream, of David's wife Eglah. These were born to David in Hebron. So he has 6 different women he's having sex with all at the same time. I mean, maybe not simultaneously, or maybe some of them. Two threesomes gets a little tricky beyond that. But I didn't mean it that way, but who knows? But he has 6 different women he's having sex with, because this is biblical marriage, right? This is marriage in the Bible. A king, a man of Israel, has multiple women that he gets to have sex with. And this is not about love. This is not about, two equals deciding to do a thing. It's about political alliances. It's about men trying to protect themselves from this guy who seems like a threat to them, right? This has nothing to do with love, commitment, compassion, any of that stuff. But it is about progeny, right? So we have 6 different sons of David talked about here. While there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner was making himself strong in the house of Saul. Yes. Oh, thank you, considering you knew. Now, Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, daughter of Aiah. Saul had a concubine. So Saul is now dead, but he had a concubine whose name was Rizpah. And Ishbaal said to Abner, who was making himself strong in his father's house, right? Why have you gone into my father's concubine? Why have you stuck your penis in our father's concubine? The words of Ishbaal made Abner very angry. He said, "Am I a dog's head for Judah? Today I keep showing loyalty to the house of your father, Saul, to his brothers and to his friends, and have not given you into the hand of David. And yet you charge me now with a crime concerning this woman. So may God do to Abner, and so may he add to it, for just what the Lord has sworn to David, that I will accomplish for him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah, from Dan to Beersheba." And Ishbaal could not answer Abner another word because he feared him. Over Abner supposedly having sex with Saul's concubine, right? That's what this fight is about. I mean, oh, good grief. When you start blaming wars on women's beauty, like that's just old, and it's tired. It doesn't work anymore. Anyway, Abner sent messengers to David at Hebron saying, "To whom does the land belong? Make your covenant with me, and I will give you my support to bring all Israel over to you." He said, "Good, I will make a covenant with you. But one thing I require of you: you shall never appear in my presence unless you bring Saul's daughter Michal when you come to see me." Remember, she's been given to someone else instead of actually being allowed to stay with David or whatever. Then David sent messengers to Saul's son Ishbaal, saying, "Give me my woman," my English's wife, "give me my woman Michal, to whom I became engaged at the price of 100 foreskins of the Philistines." Ishbaal sent and took her from her man, Paltiel, the son of Laish, my English says her husband. But her man, English's husband, but her man went with her, weeping as he walked behind her all the way to Baharim. Then Abner said to him, "Go back home." So he went. Abner sent word to the elders of Israel, saying, "For some time past you have been seeking David as king over you. Now then, bring it about. For the Lord has promised David, 'Through my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from all their enemies.'" Abner also spoke directly to the Benjaminites, one of the tribes of Israel. Then Abner went to tell David at Hebron all that Israel and the whole house of Benjamin were ready to do. When Abner came with the 20 men to David at Hebron, David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. Abner said to David, "Let me go and rally all Israel to my lord the king, in order that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may reign over all that your heart desires." So David dismissed Abner, and he went away in peace. Just then the servants of David arrived with Joab from a raid, bringing much spoil with them. But Abner was not with David at Hebron, for David had dismissed him, and he'd gone away in peace. So when Joab and all the army was with him, and all the army that was with him came, it was told Joab, "Abner, son of Ner, came to the king, and he's dismissed him, and he has gone away in peace." Then Joab went to the king and said, "What have you done? Abner came to you. Why did you dismiss him so that he got away? You know that Abner, son of Ner, came to deceive you and to learn your comings and goings and to learn all that you were doing." When Joab came out from David's presence, he sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the cistern of Sirah. But David did not know about it. When Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the gateway to speak with him privately, and there he stabbed him in the stomach. So he died for shedding the blood of Asahel, Joab's brother. That was a story we didn't read. Afterward, when David heard of it, he said, "I and my kingdom are forever guiltless before the Lord for the blood of Abner, son of Ner. May the guilt fall on the head of Joab and on all his father's house. And may the house of Joab never be without one who has a discharge, or who is leprous, or who holds a spindle, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks food." This is a pretty intense curse, right? May the guilt fall on the head of Joab, and may there always be someone in your people who are suffering. But I do love that the first one he lists is someone who has a discharge, because, again, it's all about men's penises. You guys just have such issues with that little appendage. Anyway, someone who has a discharge, who is leprous, some sort of skin disease, holds a spindle. I find that interesting. I think that's a reference to being kind of in, not necessarily enslaved to another, but a form of, I don't know, but spindle. Oh, perhaps a crutch. Oh, that's interesting. So physically, that makes more sense. Physically injured. So Joab and his brother Abishai murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel in the battle of Gibeon. Because what would the secret text of these people be without just constant references to battle and killing each other? I mean, this is just really tiring to keep reading about all this stuff. Then David said to Joab and to all the people who were with him, "Tear your clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourn over Abner." And King David followed the bier. They buried Abner at Hebron. The king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner, and all the people wept. The king lamented for Abner, saying, "Should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. As one falls before the wicked, you have fallen." And all the people wept over him again. David did, have a thing for music, right? So for him to bust out in song at someone's funeral is not unusual, right? I think that's kind of interesting thing about David, or at least about the way he's being depicted, right? Then all the people came to persuade David to eat something while it was still day. But David swore, saying, "So may God do to me and more, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun goes down." All the people took notice of it, and it pleased them, just as everything the king did pleased all the people. So all the people and all Israel understood that day that the king had no part in the killing of Abner, son of Ner. And the king said to his servants, "Do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? Today I am powerless, even though anointed king. These men, the sons of Zeruiah, it's hard to say fast, Zeruiah, are too violent for me." Really? Really? There's somebody too violent for you, David? I don't believe it. The Lord pay back the one who does wickedly in accordance with his wickedness. So we had this whole little fight going on, allegedly related to somebody having sex with someone else's dead father's concubine. And that's it. That's the piece of this story. And the fact that David still doesn't get to have Michal. He has six other women, and Michal has still been kept from him. And they talk about foreskins as if it's a normal thing to do. This is where I'm, this is where I am with all of it. Okay. So I'm a little late to this comment. I wonder if anyone was counterfeiting or grave robbing foreskins for currency, or at least for this job of presenting 100 to Saul for the purchase of Michal. Yeah. How many foreskins do you think you're worth? That's the question we should be asking ourselves, right? How many foreskins would you need? Are you worth? Are you worth? That'd be a fun little, those quizzes and things that people do for total distraction. Like, how many foreskins do you think you're worth? And do they have to be of your enemies, or can they just be? I don't know. Anyway, okay, not much today. Maybe not as entertaining as sometimes, but I hope that sharing some of this information has still been helpful. Am I the only one who thinks they use the foreskins like we do rubber bands to? Oh my gosh, that you might be, but I love that you asked it. Yeah, rubber bands. Okay. Wow. Okay. It's just such odd things all jumbled together in this story, right? Anyway, we will move ahead on Thursday. I'm not quite sure what story it is that needs to be read, but just wanted to reiterate that the reason I'm reading through these passages is to highlight the way they talk about marriage, what we call marriage, and the elements related to that. So I do think of the circumcising of dead Philistines as a form of, some form of harm to them, even if they are already dead. And I do think of this, how natural it all seems to say that sons were born to David, right? The sons are important. The sons were born to him. Like it's like it's a thing that just springs out of the ground or falls out of a pea pod. And sure, the women are important. This is probably the only time most of these women are ever named. And that's it. Thank you for your service, ma'am. And it's polygamy, by the way, just so everybody knows, instead of polygamy, because it's only men who have multiple women. So it's multiple females. So polygamy, multiple women in his life, in a verified, allowed, legally allowed, socially, culturally allowed, whatever you want to say, kinds of relationships. He had multiple women living with him in a different relationship than if she or any of them had been concubines, who are also typically living under the same roof, if not a separate wing, and are there purely for sex, whereas the wives are there for legitimate sons. Okay, there's that. Thanks for showing up. Those of you who wanted to today, I appreciate it. And yeah, I'm jumping back to one of the comments about the spindle, and that's why I was looking at the footnotes. I did too. either that or just, but I do think that the footnote is probably helpful on that it's more a reference to just being infirm, a crutch instead of a spindle is what was being referenced there. Yeah, I had a similar reaction to seeing the spindle. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. Either effeminizing a man or talking about women who are enslaved, something. So I'm going to go with the crutch interpretation of suggestion on that text. Thanks for being here. And I appreciate all the ways that you support me. One being showing up here and chatting with each other, or watching later, sharing a link of one of the videos that you've enjoyed, sharing any of the shorts with some friends, whatever it is, subscribing to my channel, recommending that a friend subscribe, or I have people who support me on Patreon, which I'm very grateful for. My second book, the audio version, Permission Granted, Take the Bible into Your Own Hands. I did the audio for that. Working on the audio for the book that just released, Marriage in the Bible, What Do the Texts Say, is finally out, and there is a 30% discount on the publisher website, not anywhere else. And you can get a copy of my book from any website or any place where you go to purchase books. But the discount on the publisher website is RL, stands for Roman and Littlefield, Family and Friends. So RLFANDF 30, so 30% discount. Very excited about that, and that it's finally out. Still haven't seen my own copy of it yet, but it's coming. And what else? Thank you for spreading the word about that book. Talking about marriage in the Bible is actually a way to talk about sex, and that's really the issue behind marriage equality issues today. Who's having sex, and to what end can that sex be? Can it be procreative or not? That's really the bottom line today. And that's because biblical texts set up people to think in terms of marriage as needing to be procreative, and the sex within it needing to be procreative. So it's very bizarrely complicated and simple all at the same time. So my contribution to conversations around marriage equality, that's what this book is. And it comes out of 10 to 12 years of my life trying to help people understand where they are getting hung up, why they're getting hung up on certain ideas that come from what they think is in the Bible. Sometimes what they think the Bible says isn't what it says. Passages that people are taught to turn to aren't actually about that. So Genesis 1:28, the first chapter in the book is, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. That has nothing to do with marriage, right? It's just a blessing from the divinity to the humans to go do what they were going to do anyway. They didn't need to be told to get busy making babies, but just like a few verses before that, God didn't need to tell the fish of the sea and the birds of the air to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth, right? Didn't need to tell them that. They were going to do it anyway, right? So 128 is really just a blessing on the people to do what comes naturally. And there's no mention of marriage. This isn't about marriage. It's about the orderliness of the universe or their world. It's because so many people today are taught sex outside of marriage is a sin, that when you see be fruitful and multiply, you assume that that's about marriage. And just that one step is really hard to get people to separate, right? Just because they're talking about procreation does not mean that they're actually talking about marriage. But many people in Jewish and Christian traditions absolutely associate those things. So all that. So anyway, and I could go through each chapter, but I won't do that right now. But anyway, that's I guess I'm just trying to explain, if you hadn't heard about my book, why I've written the book. And it's not just about marriage, and it's definitely not counseling material for people who are seeking to be married. This is about the conversation around marriage equality and my attempt to offer something useful in that conversation. So, okay, I had to do a little plug on the book, I suppose. So thanks. I will see you all Thursday.